Okay, so in this video we are going to do two things. One, we're going to look at how to handle collisions with lethal enemies, and the reason why I say that is because if you collide with the nerd, if you intercept the nerd, you don't lose a life, he gets destroyed and you get a bonus. So we're going to be looking at the moment collisions with the blob, but it'll be just as easy to extend that functionality out to the snake and the other enemies that populate the game. So we're going to look at collisions with the blob, and we're going to create a live system so that when you collide with the blob, you lose a life. We already created the safety net, so when QBert collides with this collider box, he already gets reset to the top. We just need to also have that reduce a life. So let's start with that because that'll be the easiest one to build on and to test. So the way a live system works is really just creating a variable. So we're going to go to our game flow script, and it's going to be a public static int. So we'll use in integers, and we'll use remaining lives, and we'll set it to 3. And just to clarify, calling this remaining lives in and of itself does nothing. That's internal documentation. That's to let you, the designer, know what you're going to use this variable for. The only way this actually works like lives is if you make decisions based on this value. So remaining lives equals 0. Now you're going to load the game over scene, that kind of thing. Okay, so game flow, we added a static int, and we set it to 3. 3 tends to be the default number starting amount of lives in a lot of the classic arcade games. And now we just go over to move Q, and we already have a check for collision. So, or should I say collision with the safety net. So what we have to do is we just have to reduce that variable by 1, and then in the debug log, we'll have it display so we know that it's working. So, again, since it's a static variable, we have to declare where it is, or we have to rather say where it's declared. So game flow is a script where it was created, remaining lives minus equals 1. So that should look familiar. We're saying take the current value, so what it's equal to, and minus 1 from it. And now we're just going to do debug.log and have that value displayed in the debug log so that we can make sure it really worked. So again, we have to say where that variable is, game flow dot remaining lives, semicolon at the end. Okay, so just like that, we have the beginning of a live system. Now, no decisions are going to be made yet. We'll probably do that at the end of the video. And so let's run it. So the debug log shows up down here. So if I jump off, in fact, I can just jump off right here if I really want to. There you go, 2. And we'll just kind of jump around, not that it really matters. And he stopped because he collided with QBert. And we'll hop off here. 1. 0. And then at that point, you would simply have a command that's, and we'll do it, like I said, at the end of the video. It'll say, if remaining lives equals 0, then load such and such scene, the game over scene. We'll probably create the game over scene at the end. It'll be something very basic, just as a placeholder that this is where you display, say, the high scores and things like that. Now what we need to do, we are going to check for a collision with the blob. The blob is a solid, so that means that in the QBert script, it would be detected here on collision. So right now we're not checking for what's being collided with. So the first thing we have to do is we have to say that this should only happen if you're colliding with a tile. So what we're going to do, we will create a new tag for the tile and apply it to all the tiles. So what we do, doesn't matter which one you click on because we're just going to create the tag first. So add tag, plus sign, and we'll call it tile. Save. And now we select all of them and add the tag tile. And no, you're not imagining it. I did move QBert in between tutorials. I got tired of selecting the top and then the bottom and skipping him in the middle. The order in here, for the most part, does not matter. It only matters if you're within, say, like a UI layer. And then, yes, the order in which things are displayed matter. But since this is a 3D environment, whereas the UI is 2D, this is a 3D environment, so its order, for the most part, doesn't matter. So now all the tiles have the tag tile. So what we do, we come back here, and again, this is the move Q script, and now we add a condition. We say if other dot game object dot tag equals tile. So only if this is equal to tile. So this always happened when there was a solid collision. Now we're saying only do this if it's a tile. If it collides with something else, we can now have a decision based upon that. So since we said a collision with just one lethal enemy will make all the enemies on the board disappear, basically it gives QBert a brief respite. What we're going to do, we're going to create another static variable that will indicate that a life has been lost. So we go back to game flow. We go back to public static, and we'll use a string. And this will be, we'll call it reset board. You could do life loss, reset board, whatever. And we'll default it to no, that at the default value is the board is not being reset. I don't recall if I mentioned it in the other video, but someone asked me, or they really stated, they said, don't use a string for yes or no, use a Boolean. The reason why I don't use Boolean, and technically they're right, but the reason why I don't use Boolean is too many times I think that it only needs two conditions, yes or no, and then it turns out I need like a third condition. And so if you're using Booleans, you can't do that. You have to go back and you have to basically uproot the code and change it. Whereas with the string, you can just check for a third value or a fourth value. So I don't recall if I mentioned that in the last video, but that's why I use strings instead of Booleans. You absolutely can use Booleans, but like I said, just my experience, too many times it turns out I needed a third condition, and then you kind of have to uproot the code for the Boolean. So, public static string reset board, no. So what we're going to do, we're going to have put into the script a check to see if this is yes, and if so, then the object the script is attached to will be destroyed, such as the blob, such as the snake, okay? So, let's go to blobcon, and this will just be in the update section. You don't need all the spaces. I'm just being weird. So if, and we want to do it in the update section again because we wanted to check with every frame. If game flow dot reset board equals Y, then we want something to happen. Oh, sorry, 2 equals. I'm probably going to do that like until I stop using Unity. So if reset board is equal to yes, then we want something to happen. Well, we want this object to self-destruct. So destroy game object. Now, eventually, you may want to put in a timer because in the game, the board freezes for like 5 seconds, so you have a chance to process, oh yeah, I hit it, enemy hit me, whatever, and then he gets reset. But for the moment, we'll just have it destroyed right away because, like I said, you can iterate on this. So again, this script is attached to the blob. If reset board gets set to yes, then the game object will be destroyed, whatever game object this script is attached to. So we now need this to actually happen. So I think if you jump off the board doesn't reset actually. I'd have to check. It's not a big deal, but we'll definitely have the board reset for collision with a blob. So we go back to move Q. And as I said, in here we can now check to see if a collision with a blob happened. So if, other dot game object dot tag, if it's equal to blob, then we want something to happen. We want that variable to change. So gameflow dot reset board equals Y for yes, obviously. So if we collide with the blob, we want the board to get reset, and we want the remaining lives to be reduced. So gameflow dot remaining lives minus equals 1. So we collide with a blob, the board gets reset, which causes the blobs and everything else to self-destruct. The remaining lives will be reduced by 1, and we want you to get moved to the top of the screen. Again, eventually we can put in a delay. So for now, we'll just move them, and we already know how to move them because this happens, the trigger with the net. So we can just borrow that. And we can just bring that down here. So he gets repositioned, his velocity gets increased. His velocity gets reset. My apologies. His velocity gets reset, and then gravity takes over and will bring him to the tile. So the last thing we want is we now want to have this get reset, but we want to make sure that any object gets deleted has enough time to delete. So we'll create another routine with a delay, but it'll be a very slight delay. And we will do IEnumerator, and it will be delay reset. So in the reset, we're going to do, again, you start with yield, return, new, wait 4 seconds, and it doesn't have to be long, like 0.1, so 1/10 of a second should be plenty for every object to get a chance to cycle through. And like I said, you could actually build this out, move this down here, so that's the delay, but this is good enough for now. So, collision the blob, reset board gets set to Y, which then will trigger the blobs to self-destroy. The remaining lives gets reduced by 1. Notice we're not making a decision based on that yet. He gets repositioned, and now we need to reset that value for the reset board. So gameflow dot reset board equals n. And then we need to actually call this. So start coroutine, and it's delay reset, also with its parentheses. So we're actually really close to being done with this lesson already. Like I said, we will probably the end of the video, we'll start making decisions based on remaining lives. So now what we need to do is to make sure there's enough blobs on the screen so it's easy to check this. Now, one thing we may have to adjust for, blobs are solid and QBert is solid. So when they collide, it may knock him about, so we might have to do something to steady him. So we might have to reset his rotation here, actually, which is easy. We already demonstrated that in the first or second video using Euler angles, but you'll see. So let's run it. Actually, let's go to game flow, and actually this isn't saved. We can see there's an asterisk there, so that wouldn't have worked. And then we need this to spawn a lot faster. Let's have this spawn like every 3 seconds, just so there's a whole bunch. And then we run it. Come on, Blob, don't let me down. They keep going that way. There we go. So he did kind of wobble, but he did indeed reset to the top. The blob got destroyed. And if you want, well, we could put the debug log here, but I'm sorry, not there, not for spawn, my apologies. We could do the debug log here, but that's just troubleshooting. So we already looked at it being subtracted. So he did wobble a bit. There's a few things you can do that to possibly alleviate that. But what I think we'll do, we'll leave it for now. We can leave that as a bug fix at the end. So, but again, it happens because they're solid objects and they're colliding. You can try changing like the weight of the objects. So, like if you go into any object that has a rigid body, you affect its mass. So you can make this like a really low mass and make QBert a really high mass. And that might help resolve the wobble, but it's working at the moment. Okay, so what we're going to do, we are now going to create a brand new scene, which we hadn't done up to this point, and it's going to be the game over scene. And basically all it's going to do is say game over. It's just to put that kind of placeholder so that you have some code to address it. So let's save our work. So file, save, and then new scene. And we'll immediately save this, and we're going to call it game over. And again, this is really just a placeholder scene, so we have something for the code to refer to. So let's see where our camera is. Our camera's there. And I'm not going to do anything fancy with this. Technically, since it's a 3D game and you want this to be 2D text, you could use a UI. That's really a tutorial in itself. I'm just going to use a text. So I'm just going to go to 3D objects and go to 3D text, and we'll write over here in the inspector for the text value of the text mess component. We'll just do game over. And if we click on our camera, we can see a preview, and it's completely and utterly wrong. How's that? That's better. And then what we can do, we can actually just increase that size. So make the font like not too worried about it being blurry. There's things you can do to clean that up, like you could use a lower character size, I believe will make it a little bit cleaner, but then you have to bump up the font. And again, this is really just meant to be placeholder, so you have something for the code to refer to. There we go. So what we need to do, like I showed you in the other video, we need to add it to the build. So file, build settings, game over. And then what we need to do, we need to put into the code that we want that to get loaded when remaining lives equals 0. So was that in game flow that we did? Yes, this is where we did the low level. So we already have scene management up here. So I guess what we can do is, just as we check in the update section, so if remaining lives is less than 1. That way, if for some bizarre reason it goes from 1 to -1, I can't think of any reason why, this will still catch it. Because 0 is less than 1, so if it goes to 0 like it should, this will work. But if for some reason it glitches and goes beyond 0, beneath 0, below 0, this will still catch it. And then it's just same coding. So scene manager dot load scene, and then it was game over. I think that should do it. Now we need to save this. We go back to, when you build it, it will run in the order displayed here. But when you're testing it, it'll start on whatever level you currently have loaded, whatever scene you have currently loaded, unless you have like code in place to say load a different scene. So we'll come back to here. And that's one of the annoying things is that like the director's camera, whatever you want to call it, it stays the same across scenes. So what works in one scene puts you kind of out of place in the next scene. But only from the director's point of view, the player camera is fine. So let's just kind of hop off the board. Hop off the board again. Yep. I believe what happens, I got hit a bunch of times. It's hard to tell because things kind of piled on me. See, that's the solid collision that I was talking about with him, so that's one of the things we'll fix. But for now, what we'll do is we will just delay him since we're only trying to test. So game flow, I'm just going to have him not spawn on a regular basis, and we can actually make this take a little bit longer too. So I just want to like hop off the board. There we go, and we'll hop off again, and we'll hop off again, and there we go. So that when you can see it says 0, and we did indeed go to the game over scene. So I think that should be it for this video. That's really everything that I wanted to cover. So we looked at how to handle collision with the lethal blob, and that coding will work for the snake. It'll work for the other guys. It's just a matter of checking for creating a tag, affixing the tag to the object, and then you just check for it. So what you could do is here, you could just do object.game, other.gameObject.tag equals blob, or other.gameObject.tab equals snake, or, you can just, you don't have to rewrite this whole thing. You can just put some ors in here. And again, I'm just kind of thinking ahead. I'll show you how to do that when we add the additional enemies. But I think that should do it. I have no reason to believe that it won't work for the blobs. Don't want to waste your time because that's going to be a bunch of hopping around, but it should work. And I think that should do it for this video. So that's basically what we wanted. We have a game over scene now, and you can just build that out. And like I said, in a later video, we'll look at that. I'm just trying to put all the core functionality in place. So maybe in the next tutorial, we'll probably keep building on this idea. So we'll look at how to handle collisions with the nerd. And then after that, we'll do some of the bells and whistles, like we'll add the start screen, so the title screen. Maybe I'll get a sound file from the Unity store, and that way there's a sound for him hopping onto the tiles. And so we've got a couple more videos to go, but we're getting really close to having the core game in place. So I hope that this was useful to you. I hope you found it informative, and I hope you have a good day. And again, if there's certain features that I'm forgetting that you want to see, just leave a comment, and have a good day.